Hello, everyone, and welcome to our The Inclusive Workforce April series. I hope you are all enjoying a wonderful moment of this day, whatever it happens to be on your time zones as you are watching us or listening to us live and also later on via the recording. Today, we will be spending 1 hour talking about cultural diversity and even more specifically about managing a culturally diverse distributed workforce. My name is Minola Jacques. I will be your co host for the time today. We have Jessa taking exquisite care of us backstage, making sure everything runs smoothly. So, if you do enjoy this talk today, please make sure you also say a big thank you to her. And I would just start us off with a kind request for help. If anyone in the audience can just drop a note and let us know that we are live and we are not stuck in some internet back loop on LinkedIn, that would be wonderful. Do let us know also where you're connecting from. And it's always so good to see where Hacking HR takes us around the world. Now we have an amazing lineup of speakers for today, and I will ask Jessa to help me bring them on stage. And as they come online, I will continue to encourage people in the audience to consider this conversation open and theirs as much as it is ours, especially because we talk about cultural diversity. And there are so many nuances coming into this topic. And just drop us a note and let us know what are your own experiences and take on this topic and help us grow and learn from each other. Now, let's try to make the most out of our short time today. And what I will do, I will kick us off with a round of introductions. I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen clockwise. And I will ask you to first just shortly, kindly introduce yourselves. And also, do let us know what makes this topic so particularly meaningful to you personally that you decided you would take time and energy to be here. Before that, just a kind logistics request to panelists. When you are not contributing, if you can stay on mute so that we are safe from echo. And also, I will let you in on a secret. When you unmute yourself, that's my secret cue that you want to jump into the conversation. So, Alisa, it's so good to see you again. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you too. My name is Alisa. My history in HR has been building remote global organizations so in the startup world. This is near and dear to my heart because at the end of the day, we're all human. We want to be respected and valued, and understanding where each of us come from is very important, and respecting those differences and how those differences can actually bring us together versus divide us.
Thank you so very much. Peter, it's been a hot minute since we shared the conversation. Good to see you. Welcome.
Great to see you too, Manola. Excellent. So nice to be back. And thanks for all you Hacking HR are doing. It's just fantastic opportunities. We keep marketing you, getting more people to come and join. So I'm an HR executive leader. I've been in the tech world of Fortune 500 companies for a long time. Also a certified coach with a lot of international leadership experience. I am as you probably get from my accent, I am American, but I'm also a French citizen. I've got both nationalities, and I'm bilingual in French and English. I lived and worked and raised a family in France and in Spain for over 20 years, and moved, I don't say back to the US, I moved to the US after 20 years, kind of like where's home. Moved to the US a little less than 3 years ago, now in the greater Boston area. And looking for new opportunities, to be honest, doing some coaching, doing some consulting, and but I really am in transition, looking for that next great opportunity where I can add value. So great to be here.
Thank you so very much. Sophie, so good to see you. This is a lucky month. I get to have you on more than just one panel.
Yeah, that's amazing, Manola. So my name is Sophie Lee. I am a founder of Sophie Lee Global. That is a HR advisory and executive coaching firm. And, I'm so passionate about this topic because, I was born and raised in Taiwan, which is kind of a hybrid culture of Chinese and Japanese. And I came to the US back in 2010, a long time ago. And I started working in, some of the major big tech Fortune 500 companies since then. And amazing opportunity came up in 2015 that, I was able to move to Sydney, Australia, and work and live there for about 2 years when I was working at Dell, and then back to Austin, where I'm located in. And I always joke with my friends, I'm just waiting for Europe to call my name sometime, somehow. And, just working in different parts of the world and having the opportunity to work with people from such a beautiful, diverse background, I want to echo to what Lisa mentioned, right? What I realize is that we're all human beings first. And despite that, we all have, these beautiful different cultural norms, and different ways of working, but there are so many common things that we all share the same traits as humans. So I'm super excited, to be part of discussion today, along with the amazing panelists to kind of deep dive into this topic.
Thank you. And how wonderful to have you with us, Dr. Susan, today and making our panel complete. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Manila. I'm Dr. Susan King, and I'm an HR professional. I have been in the role for my entire career. Could you imagine that? But what has drawn me to this topic is because I have worked in international organizations, and the cultural diversity is so profound. And if you cannot embrace that, well, you're not embracing life. And so for me, working in those settings with people from all walks of life, has been so amazing for me. I've been working in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I've been in the New York area. Actually, I'm an immigrant from South America, but having to navigate those cultural diversities, even while studying in the Dominican Republic, it was so amazing. And like I would say to everyone, whether studying and working, our work or our studies, for example, it's not about achieving certificates, it's not about meeting goals, but it's about enriching our lives with the people with whom we come into contact with whom we have to work with. And for me, that is so profound for me, even in my latter years in my career, because it's about sustaining that humanity with the people. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for being here. And I will just contribute a very, very short personal share. I was looking forward to this conversation, and this is profoundly meaningful to me. So I'm originally from Romania. I actually come from a mixed family. I'm half Romanian, half Hungarian. But in the meantime, I am what I call a serial immigrant. So I am currently based in Switzerland, and this is my 17th country in 20 years. And it just so happens that I work for a company of 60,000 people, and only 20% of us have English as our first language. So I do consider this conversation a big hug, and I can't wait to dive into the topic. Now, before we do dive into the topic of cultural diversity and cultural competence, I do want to take just a few minutes and look at everything that has been unfolding within our workplaces over the past years. And I would ask, can we just talk a little bit about the key trends or the key focus areas that do make cultural diversity and cultural competency such a critical topic moving forward? The first thing that comes to mind is, remote work and work from anywhere, and just this expansion of the workplace beyond the actual physical location. And that I have no idea why, but I always go diagonally first. So Sophie, I will ask you to be our pioneer on this one. And then everybody just jump in as inspiration strikes and build your conversation. So Sophie.
Yeah, that's such a huge, trend and topic, right? Even more so since COVID started, whether companies would like to or not, right? They voluntarily or involuntarily move into the remote place. And, when that was a time when, I was working at Atlassian, and at the time, we were already embracing this hybrid working culture, right? And experimenting with a remote working culture. And when COVID hit, that was all hands on deck. And what I discovered was, for a lot of leaders who were used to managing a team where they get to see the team members on a daily basis in the same location, right? That was a huge challenge they faced, because all of a sudden, how do you remain that connection with your team members, especially, even more so now, like global companies, it's very typical for a leader to have team members sitting in all different parts of the world in different time zones. So how do you ensure that inclusivity around different team members? And by having those dialogues, right, either async or synchronously, there is a lot of technical topics and how we go about solving those problems together. But what I have found really helpful is really coming from a more kind of human beings first, right, standpoint, is starting building that, more personal relationships, and start building that kind of trust, because there's no team, right, without a trust first. So having that curiosity in mind and wanting to kind of genuinely understand how your team members are doing from a personal standpoint. Every meeting doesn't have to be a work productivity checking meetings, right? It's even more so important when you're not seeing each other, on a daily basis, just how frequently you can have those touch points. I found plays a huge role in maintaining that team spirit, in maintaining that authentic connection.
Thank you, Sophie. Peter.
Yeah, just 100% agree with you, Sophie. And it's a complicated subject for sure. Post-COVID, just that in itself, right? All that did for ourselves. And during COVID, we remind ourselves many people moved away from their hub to take care of families, to take care of loved ones, and found a different sort of reassessment of their values vis-a-vis family and work balance. And when COVID sort of took a more acceptable turn, I don't think it's gone, but a more acceptable turn, so whatever normal is now, we've got the tension of employee populations who rightly have said, we not only were we more productive than others expected us to be during that period of time, but our levels of wellness and happiness are higher because we're able to be in a situation that we've chosen to be. While at the same time, at least in the US, you're seeing a clear trend towards requiring people to come back into the office. And when I hear people talk about back to office versus flexible workplace, it really bugs me, because the back to office assumes that we're going back to the office. And it's sort of like, what did we learn from this experience in COVID? So I think we're seeing now in the field a tug and war between the business leaders and CHROs who are saying, for productivity reasons and for those young hires, to ensure that we have contact for them and sort of innovation spirit, that we want people physically located in the office, kind of like the old days. And then the real strong pull on the talent front of asking to be accepted where I work, in the way I work, and that motivates us best. And I guess the last point is on diversity. I mean, I think we learned that we have a much higher tendency to have a diverse workforce if we allow them to work in different ways flexibly. So this is just it's just beginning, I believe.
Thank you. Where do we go next? Dr. Susan, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. I just want to take it back a little further to say that the whole remote working was going on even before COVID-19, but it became more profound after COVID. So my question to anyone would be, what were we doing to manage our cultural diverse workforce before COVID? COVID kind of gives some light and spark to all this cultural diversity and remote working, but it was there before, And so for me, it's just making our techniques and strategies more intense, more expansive, more extensive about what we do with the culturally diverse workforce, So all that was mentioned before with Sophie and Peter, I do agree. And we need the technical competencies of the cultural awareness. I mean, this becomes more like, at the moment, yes, let's talk about this. Let's talk about our shared values and norms, But cultural diversity and remote working was even before COVID. It's just that the techniques we're using now has become more elaborative, more profound, and more meaningful, I would say,
Mhm.
to the population. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a great.
Alisa.
Oh, sorry, Elisa, go ahead.
All great points, trying to figure out where I could add value. But Dr. Susan, you mentioned something interesting going pre-COVID, what were we doing? And I think some of those things may have been more in a compliance process. And now we've moved into the human process of that cultural diversity. We've all experienced globally something significant in our lives that affected all of us, that brought us together. And now we're not just going through diversity training or anti-harassment training. Now we're looking at each other as human beings and like, wow, we all experienced this together. We all need to take care of each other, embracing our differences and realizing that we're more common than we thought previously prior to COVID. I'm interested to see the census, 10 years after COVID, to see who we are as as a global community. I think that will be super telling. But I think you hit the nail on the head there, Dr. Susan, is with just like, what were we doing before and how has that changed who we are afterwards? And I think my motto for the last 18 months has been grace and patience. And I think that has become much more prominent in the workplace as we've moved past COVID, as we've realized that, we don't have to be so rigid in our own beliefs or thoughts and processes, but to expand that, to bring that together. Not to mention that remote work expanded all of that. And now you have people, the digital nomads. And so there's been some demographic shifts of, where people are living and working. Peter worked in France, and, Sophie's in Australia and things of that nature. So it's interesting to see how now we're more blended. The lines, the divisions of countries or regions are less seen, so to speak.
Yeah, and Alicia, I do agree with that too. Excuse me, Manila, for taking it out. Because, it's like prior to COVID, with the whole cultural diversity, you would sense in the air, so what? But now you see in the blending, the humanness, everything like coming together, the more unity, trying to understand each other, views, perspectives, respecting each other. But I've seen that like unfolding more now. And thank you for that.
Thank you, Peter.
Agree 100%. And I think where we see the juncture is, before COVID, where it worked well was where leadership teams, management level teams, up from the top down, truly valued through their behaviors an inclusive workforce and an ability to manage effectively remote workers in different nationalities and cultures. And we had good examples of that before COVID, for sure. What COVID did is it threw everything into a crisis mode where we were able to see where it wasn't being handled really well, like to an extreme degree. And those who did it well, did it exceptionally well, because it was an amazing opportunity to keep teams together under such a difficult, traumatic situation. And I believe now it really is a lot of talk. I mean, before there was always talk around management, importance of leaders. I just hear it hyped up now more and more. But what I like to see is it's more around culture building, in the sense of it's the behaviors of managers and leaders. It's not the talk, because there's a lot of talk before. And now I think we're seeing where the proof is in the pudding. And I hope to see that leaders are going to be selected out who aren't able to show those competencies. Like that'll be maybe the next stage. But I do believe we're in an interesting little revolution, I hope.
Mm. How does cultural diversity show up in the workplace? What are some of the behaviors? What are some of the team agreements around cultural diversity, if we can call them that? And can we just give a few examples of what value does cultural diversity bring into the workplace? So how does it show up in the workplace? And what does it bring? And Alisa, I would invite you to lead us into this one.
Sure. I think there's a lot of places where we can see that it shows up. A lot of it can be in our communication styles and recognizing that we speak differently or we think differently, as well as, are you creating workplace norms that are inclusive? and leaving out the Americanisms and things of that nature if you are in a global workplace. Those are some of the things that pop out at me. It's really about communication and just being able to speak, whether it's synchronously or asynchronously. Sophie, you mentioned the asynchronous. I worked at a global organization where I only spoke to people asynchronously because there was such a large time difference, and being able to understand each other when English is not somebody else's primary language. And I think those are the places, as just being able to communicate in a way with those that may not think the same way as you, and being open-minded. I think that's where I see a lot of it showing up recently in the years. And can I just give a shout out to our Gen Z who has raised hands in terms of asking, Peter, you mentioned earlier about leadership needs to get on board with this inclusivity and leading by example. And I think we've seen a lot between employers and employees, the dividing line, and our younger workforce is saying like, hey, we want to talk about this and things of that nature. So I really appreciate our incoming workforce being able to raise their hand and vocal about it, and making us all really think about it and not getting caught up in the day to day that we might have, as us older generations might be doing.
Thank you, Alyssa.
And I want to echo what Elisa you mentioned about, like communication is such a big piece. And in my experiences, right, it is not it's a good assumption that not everybody speaks English or can understand English very well. So in a lot of circumstances, especially really important, oral communication, we would need to leverage our local experts' support, right? Some of the meetings need to be conducted in local languages so people can actually have a higher comprehension or understanding about what's actually happening and going on that they care about, and also be given the opportunity to express their thoughts or asking questions. Because what I discover is a lot of times when we just looping everybody in the one big global town hall meeting, right? And you come to like Q&A time, right? Not a lot of people who don't speak, English at a fluent level to their own confidence, right? They would feel comfortable speaking out with such a big audience. So that is kind of the design in place. And the other part is also when it comes to bringing all the leaders together, right? When it comes to like performance discussions, and how do we even define the behavior, the attributes as examples as we're talking about top performers. And just an example that I realize is, even though we're using the same word, but it has very different meanings in different cultures. For example, a few years ago when we're talking about, is it important for a leader to exemplify vulnerability? In the US, that means leaders have the courage to open up, right, to their team to show their vulnerable moments. But for our Indian team, it's such a very difficult concept to embrace, because vulnerability means to them is something that they're ashamed of. So why would they want to talk about something they're ashamed of, especially during interview discussion? So it's really about having those dialogues constantly and really understand about what are the differences in when we're feeling or thinking we're saying the same thing but actually very different, and have that curiosity to kind of dig in, and always assuming the best intent in the first place, so then we can come to that common ground faster, instead of sometimes could be conflicts because of lack of understanding or appreciation for one another.
So if I jump in here, thanks Alicia and Sophie. I want to say in my prior organizations that I've worked, cultural diversity was very intentional. So for example, there was a core value that was established that says respect for diversity. And in that, they had different criteria under which you can be assessed. And that was being assessed also in your performance evaluation report. I mean, how you treat others, you show others respect, you be open to other perspectives, you treat men and women fairly. And, it had its elements there. And staff were evaluated on those elements and even given grades. Also, in another intentionality was the language support. We talked about language where many people don't speak English. Well, I was once in a country where it was French was their mother tongue, and the example for me, I never knew French, but I had to be there because of a system transition, which was in English, and so I had to attend classes. I had to get involved and with, the resources that they provided to help others like myself to navigate the challenge of the language. I mean, there were translation tools that were put in place, and other things to support us. But there's also the aspect of celebrating the cultural holidays and festival. Where I'd worked previously, we took note of that, and different belief systems, persons were allowed, accommodations were provided so that respect for the diversity could have been upheld. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, and I agree 100% with everyone. Then there's this whole level of non-linguistic language, is sort of the, behaviors and norms, and we won't go into them because there's so many. But it's imperative on the leaders and then in the sort of the growth mindset of the team to understand that this isn't just about slowing down if this is an American company and we're speaking English or succinctly. It's about really understanding the behavior of people. Someone might be arriving a bit late, or maybe having side conversations that are okay in that culture and not others. And it doesn't mean we have to just accept a little bit of chaos in all of our meetings. It just means we need to be sensitive to those different dynamics so that we can speak, understand, just decide together as a team what's the protocol, and then then just sort of agree as we move forward on this is the way that we communicate together as a team. It's just a lot more work, a lot more need to listen and to understand and respect each other. Including, by the way, the amount of vacation some country might take over another one, and give a lot of permission to that, because there's this unspoken judgments that especially Americans can give on other cultures for having their 5 to 6 weeks of vacation in August. And sorry, but they just take it and they're proud of it. Americans have the other problem of giving, some kind of excuse for taking their 2 weeks. Or I know that's changing.
I would really love to, excuse me, I would really love to go into a bit of detail around what are the specific skills and capabilities that are required to manage culturally diverse teams, especially if we put the additional layer of those teams being distributed. What are some of the even not necessarily automatically thought of skills required to manage culturally diverse teams? And Dr. Susan, would you lead us into this, please?
Great, a little slow on muting. Yeah, one of the first skill I would say is to have the cultural competency. And in that, I mean, you have that awareness. And for me, the awareness, the sensitivity, the adaptability to navigate those cultural norms and values. Because here it is, we're having a workforce that not only distributed, but it is so diverse, and everyone has, or every culture has its own belief system, values, norms. So as a manager, you need to have that awareness and don't try to put everything like a one size fits all, so that, and going along with the cultural competencies, having effective communication skills. I mean, and that goes through any profession, that we all need to have effective communication skills when we are managing particularly those remote teams, because you may say or use a particular word or dialect and someone interprets it to mean something else. So sometimes at the point when I was in that kind of situation, I would repeat and I would ask if we're on the same, well, we use the term wavelength. You understand what I said? Yes. Or you want to tell me if you understand? We have that. But again, the person with whom you're communicating with, just to make sure that the communication is clear. And also to have some empathy and this emotional intelligence when we're dealing with people, because I find a lot now that a lot of emotions kind of rise up. I'm not sure what's causing these emotions to rise up, because sometimes you say something and it's being taken differently, and it's all with an emotion. And so as a manager, you have to not get even, but try to manage that emotions either by setting guidelines, rules, procedures that incorporate the way we behave, the way we speak, the way we talk, or whatever, but those are my 3 points: the cultural competencies, the communication skills, and having empathy and that emotional intelligence.
Mm. What a great start. Who would like to add to this?
I would sort of piggyback and say that in addition, facilitation skills, ability to, from a coach, almost a coaching perspective, be able to slow things down, being able to facilitate conversation and discussion, more important than ever. One, because you're remote. I mean, even in the same culture, that skill is important for remote workforces. But when you have multiple cultures there with different language capabilities and different ways of looking at things, hearing things, it's critical. And I think just fundamentally, I don't know if you call it a skill, but it's something we work on. It's the emotional intelligence aspects that Dr. Susan was talking about. But more than ever, the importance of being humble as a leader, and because with humility becomes the ability to listen better, and if we can, even though humor is hard to translate between different cultures, it's always a good thing. It's always good to add humor in, and then you can talk about why someone didn't get that humor, and you can talk about it, but it's sort of a safe way to lighten things up, but at the same time, in some ways, uncover other different cultural nuances that we need to understand.
Yeah, I want to echo what Peter and Dr. Susan White mentioned about, right? Is that kind of empathy and that emotional intelligence, and kind of coming back to human beings first. A couple of things that we talk a lot about psychological safety these days, and that is such a critical element for leaders to understand how to build that amongst their team members. And a lot of times is kind of going back to individual, right? That's not assuming, and sometimes I know I can fall into that trap as well, generalizing that people from certain countries have certain similar cultures or behave similarly, but sometimes that can be quite the opposite. So what I realize is that leaders can leverage, right, say user manuals for each individual to kind of talk for themselves, like what is their preferred working style, working schedule. Some people have kids, some people don't, but some people have to look after elder parents. Everybody's life situation is different. What is their preferred way of communication? Some people love Slacks, like myself, but some people prefer, right, more thoughtful, like emails and in meetings, right? And so when we all come together, if we can let individuals express kind of their own preferred flavors of communication, then we establish that understanding each other first. And when we come together, right, as a team, when we're going through that the storming and finally norming, and hopefully we get to the performing stage, like we can brainstorm together as a team, because sometimes the leader may feel like they have to do it all. But if we can leverage and tap into the power of our team, it's for the team to decide how do we want to function and collaborate together as a team. And when we get to the meeting time, right, can we rotate? It doesn't always have to be late night for Asia or early morning for US. What works best for everybody, right? Most of the time, even though it's not going to be a perfect solution for everybody, but at least we build that mutual understanding together.
So quickly, if I just, Sophie, what that calls for a commitment to inclusion by our leaders. Because like you were saying earlier, it's like they should not feel that they have it and can do it all alone. We want the underrepresented voices to be heard. We want to build inclusivity with the whole theme and not just decisions and all other strategic stuff being made at an upper level. Get the others involved. So it's a commitment to inclusion that is required for that. Thank you.
Oh, that's so true. If I may just add one thing, right, to Dr. Susan, what you're referring to is, like if leaders can work together with a team about how decisions are made, with some thought process behind, then not everybody has always wait for a leader to make that final call when they are like 12 hours apart or 16 hours apart, right? Then the team members will feel even more empowered to be able to make the impact and make the decisions, especially in some situations when, decision time is like now, not 16 hours later. And that would really alleviate a lot of pressure on team members as well as leaders of the team.
Exactly. Thank you.
Alisa, you're on the hot seat of going last for this one.
I'm trying to figure out what to add. All such great points. Honestly, I don't think I would say anything different. I think the psychological safety is a big piece. That's another foundation. Not only are we human and we need to respect that everybody's human, but then the psychological safety of ensuring that people can speak up without feeling punished or humiliated. That is a huge piece. People don't want to speak up about their norms or what expectations and things of that nature. And that really is where that inclusivity doesn't come together, or the bonding or the vibe on a team. I know that's a slang word, but the synergy that a team creates is because there's this trust and psychological safety. Everybody can speak freely, everybody can share things, doesn't matter where they may reside or what their background is and things of that nature. I was working with engineers in Thailand and the Eastern European countries, and we would always say, who's taking the 11 o'clock meeting? And we would just trade off. And it was this, we were okay with who was going to take the late night meeting, or, doing new hire orientation at 8 p.m. on a Sunday for those in the APAC region and things. And so for those of that, it was like a give and take. And I think there's a little bit of that as well, is this give and take. Sometimes you're taking the early morning meeting, sometimes you're taking the late night meeting, but there's a psychological safety of being able to say, I don't want to do that, or this is how I like to communicate. I'm a texter and a Slack person too, Sophie. I would much rather, speak asynchronously, but I also know that requires very concise communication, clear communication, making sure that I'm not using American contractions or slang or things of that nature. And I'm just realizing now that I'm probably speaking fast, and we have a lot of non-Americans on the call. So learning to speak slower, because not everybody's first language is English, and my rapid English is not going to, resonate with everybody and things of that nature. So there's just a lot that goes on with that. And I think it just comes back down to, one, we're all human, give everybody some grace and patience and empathy, but then also provide that psychological safety of allowing people to say whatever it is that they need to say, so that, that's where we build that inclusivity bridge and, stop instead of tearing it down. I would much rather have somebody yelling at me in Slack in all caps, because then I know you trust me, right? If you do that to me in Slack or email or even on Zoom, then that tells me you trust me in some form or fashion, and I'm okay with that.
Could I, Manila, I know we have one to move on. Can I just add just one point that I think is really important? We tend to think about distributed workforces as almost as though like everyone's remote. And some of us have managed teams where everyone's remote. I've been in that situation, but often it's a situation where some of us are remote, some of us aren't. And some of us are sitting in the same office, and you're having conference calls with video calls with just the technology and the consciousness when we talk about the skills of a leader, but also the teams, the ability to manage inclusivity when someone is literally on the screen from even just in another town, to ensure that they're being heard, giving equal opportunity to contribute. And then that's back to the facilitation skills that are really important. And also given opportunities to participate on projects and progress. There needs to be all those perceptions that people are giving a true equal opportunity in those domains. And that's a lot on a leader, but absolutely critical.
Well, a few years back, and I was working in Oman at the time, I came across this wonderful book. It's called Fish Can't See Water. And it's about how we all have deeply ingrained, so organic, innate national cultural traits in us that most of the time we are oblivious to them. I I do remember working with a team a few years back, and there was this amazing guy on the team, and he at one point said, I didn't realize how Dutch I was until I started working outside of the Netherlands. Now, what this book says is that these innate cultural traits usually come out to play when we are either under pressure or within decision-making environments. And I would invite each of you, if you can, this is the storytelling invitation, if you can think back to a situation where you had to navigate culturally diverse and culturally sensitive situations, and, you know, just top of my head, maybe a feedback conversation, or you had to, back to your point, Peter, you had to facilitate or mediate in a conflict context to culturally diverse parties. And I will give you a few seconds to think about, just enough to welcome everybody who joined us a little bit later. We are already 10 minutes into the second half of our conversation today. And before we get those questions, I will just anticipate them. And yes, we are recording this panel, and you are always welcome to go back and re-listen or recommend it. So give us a story about how you navigated culturally layered and culturally sensitive situations in the workplace. And please unmute as inspiration strikes. I won't prompt anyone this time.
I can go, Manila. I'll do a quick one. So this may be the easy one, but I was managing a team in Europe, 14 countries, right when COVID hit, and it was in mergers and acquisitions team, and so most were out in the field doing work, and we almost never saw each other. However, as those who know in Europe, at the very least, each country had a different protocol. It became increasingly clear, and my team members had really diverse experiences, from, you know, deaths in the family in certain those preliminary countries in particular, to some countries in the north, one in particular that just was looking at herd immunity, and everyone was out having drinks in the park, and then everything in between. And while this isn't necessarily a cultural thing, it really was, in a sense that the different protocols divided the countries. The countries were extremely different, Manal, you know, and anyone who was in Europe. We nevertheless had to stay tight, stay working. The business continued. And I knew I had to bring the team together as close as possible, more than ever before. And I started a series of small roundtables where I would just bring in a person from each, only like 4 or 5, so we could all be on the same screen. And I did 1 hour a week, and then we did more, and the feedback was enormous. And we really, just the first part of that call was about sharing our experiences, you know, just not talking about business, just sharing our experiences during COVID, and vis-a-vis our government's responses to it, and family responses. And it was radically different. And some people were really suffering, and others were actually saying how what a great opportunity it was to be in their backyard all the time because they happened to have a nice house, whereas others were in a little apartment. So it was an example where I felt I needed to use technology. So thank goodness for the video technology, have these roundtables, and it brought us very close together during our very traumatic time. And we continued to use that technique, if you will, for other things later on. So there's my example.
Thank you, Peter. Who's our next storyteller? I will pass the e-mic around. Alisa, do you want to go?
You must have known that my mouse was on the unmute button. You know, thinking back earlier, you know, about 10 years ago in my career, I was with a small startup that was growing rapidly globally. You know, every time I turned around, we were hiring in a new country and things, and just understanding what their expectations were. And so I had implemented, you know, as we were working on employee engagement activities and things of that nature. This is all pre-COVID, so things were normal, right? But you could see as we are hiring rapidly and we are bringing in new hires from different countries, you could see the cultural differences, not in a bad way, but you could just see like it was starting to be a melting pot. And to proactively get ahead of that, we started having employee stay interviews. And that seems like a common thing you do, but a lot of that was just, we're here to listen. What is your experience? How is it, you're the only employee we have right now in Romania. I mentioned earlier when we opened the APAC region, it was very early on, and we just had a small group in the Philippines. And so I brought them all together I'm going to say it, we were actually on Skype still. So that we weren't on Slack yet. And we did create like a Slack channel or a Skype channel for all of them to communicate. I'm like, hey, you all are in the same region, and it's several hours difference from the next group that would be waking up for the day. And so those were some of the things that we were doing to bring people together in regions to kind of have that team environment or to feel the closeness within the organization. And we just continue to do that around. And while those seem like normal things, but if we had not done those, then we would have had a region of people that would have felt very on the outskirts for a long time until that area grew. And I wholeheartedly believe in stay interviews and checking with employees to really just understand what their experience is, not how was onboarding or how is your one-on-one with your manager, or how do you feel about performance reviews. It's more about, how are you? Tell me about your experience here. Are you being heard? Do you feel like you're able to raise your hand without feeling, rejected or punished in some form or fashion? And that really helped as the organization grew very rapidly across different countries and, the cultural differences. And it actually, we started having incredible engagement activities. Employees were like, oh, I know how to make this. And we would literally have Zoom cooking online. And so it was one of those things where we learned how to make all kinds of things. Somebody was making empanadas and it was just these things that we just started doing that seems that you could only do in the office, like the potluck, but we would all just be in our kitchen for a couple hours one day. I remember during the holiday season, we all learned how to make challah bread, and, that's 3 different sessions. You got to make it, let it rise, and bake it. But those were things that after understanding what everybody wanted to share, people wanted to share their cultural differences and what their background and growing up. And what we did is we said, share. And people said, I want to share by what I eat or how I work out or how I vacation. And so we let them share what was natural to them, which really created inclusivity and which was a lot of fun, which it was all started with, just really talking to employees and then kind of making this bucket of like, wow, there's all this information. How can we possibly share this with everybody? And so, it started with, oh, let's make cookies or something of that nature. And I know that sounds silly on Zoom, but it really did bring the organization. Is probably one of my favorite things that I will ever always talk about.
Thank you, Alisa. Sophie.
Well, listen, you're talking about food and eating, that gets me excited. When we were talking about that, I remember, when I first time I went to visit our Indian office, all the meeting rooms are named after a cuisine, a dish name. And that's how important food is in that culture. People bond over eating and, like enjoying food together. And that's literally the definition of team building, I guess. And, there are also a lot of different kind of ways of, doing the artwork together, especially, when we bring the team from different parts of the world and sometimes, remote through Zoom, it just make it more kind of interesting. What I want to share, like a story is, when we bring like, and this is not like picking on any particular country or culture, just kind of a personal story or experience that I had is, when we bring the team, say, like from different parts of the world, like sometimes it's the East meets the West, right? And Manila, you kind of earlier touched upon the Dutch culture, right? My experience that they are very known for being very candid about their opinions and very transparent. And sometimes, for people in the Eastern culture, right, that can come across as a bit of a cultural shock, because the cultural norm is that, you usually like interact on a one-on-one situation, and sometimes it's very confrontation averse type of culture. So for people to talk about feedback and giving each other feedback, especially those constructive feedback, that can be very challenging, to how do you convey that in a way that is respectful and that is not going to be taken in a different light. So it's just kind of building that, and sometimes have a bit of humor, right? Like what Peter, you say, it's like, hey, I'm very direct, and sometimes it may not land very well in a very different cultural aspect, but feel free to give me feedback, right? Or give me a bit of wink wink so that I know, right? Yeah, probably need to take a different approach. But just building that kind of a bit of humor, and also the ability to kind of laugh out ourselves first, and then open up that space to kind of welcome a different perspective is so important. And what I learned is always assume positive intent first, because when we don't always understand the other culture, right, we may get into this zone of confusion, and sometimes we may feel frustrated. But what I realized is just having a candid conversation and just say, hey, I'm not quite sure when you made that facial expression, what does that mean? Or, we say this that make me feel this way or think this way. Like, am I getting this wrong or not? And just having that open dialogue, and sometimes, just clear things up really easily, instead of letting it just kind of brew for a few weeks. And then it's like, boom, I'm not able to like do this anymore or whatnot. It really helps to just having that open dialogue, and that does wonders oftentimes.
Thank you, Sophie. Dr. Susan, bring us home on the storytelling challenge.
Yeah, and it's going to be very short also, because I just want to keep it for the sake of confidentiality. Myself and 3 other colleagues working on a project, 3 different locations. And so to roll out this project, we have a conflict with communication styles. Everyone has their own perspective. And so what do we do? What I'd done was to find a common ground. Finding a common ground meaning we went back to the whole objectives of working on the program, and what was that supposed to be achieving. And from there, we tried to take the strengths of each other's perspective, not to make it feel too exclusive, but to consider those perspectives that were, because all were valid, and use them in a way that everyone felt heard or safe or considered. And that was my story.
Wonderful.
Yeah, finding common ground.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. One very, very small thing that I started doing about a year ago, every time I start working with a new team, we have this icebreaker when I ask everybody as part of their intro to share their favorite word in their mother tongue, what it means, and why is that word so special to them. And we've been having very, very deep words. We had a few incredibly funny words. But it's just so heartwarming to see that even that one word completely changes the dynamic and the energy around the room. So with about 6 more minutes to go before wrapping this one up, I would ask each of you, can you share a small practice that everybody on this call can do, whether we are HR practitioners or not, just to raise awareness around cultural diversity and just make the bubble around us a little bit better? So one practice that you found particularly impactful or meaningful in your work. And for the interest of time, I will pass the e-mic around and we will go like we started. So Alisa, you will go first and then we work our way around the screen.
Oh, I was still thinking. But similar to what you do, Manola, for your teams is when I join a new team or I have new team members come on, I send out a survey of how their communication style, how they like to be recognized, some favorite foods. Sophie, you know, you're right. People love to gather around food and share favorite recipes. I saw somebody on here that said they made a global cookbook. I've done that as well. And those are absolutely amazing in bringing people together. But it is to find those common themes among the team and even do it, you know, and then, you know, with permission and consent, you know, can we share that information on a larger scale? So I start very small within the team. And I think that is something we can all do, regardless of whether you're a leader or an individual contributor. You know, how do your peers and others that you work with want to communicate? What things are they comfortable sharing, communication style, maybe favorite foods or flowers and things of that nature. I think that's always a great start to get the conversation started, to creating that foundation of psychological safety, the empathy, understanding cultural differences. So really just building a relationship, I think, is what it really is, and asking those safe personal questions that people are always willing to share. So if anybody's asking, I'm open to tacos on any day, not just Tuesday.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Peter.
Sure. So I used to, when I was running Europe, I would have a all hands, actually other jobs as well, all hands calls every quarter, and that would be the global call. And yet every quarter I would charge a regional team, because we were in regions, you know, from Nordics to, you know, Benelux, the CE countries, there are plenty of them, to be responsible for the agenda. And it was critical that with one of the items had to be a non-business item, and it was up to the team to work together. So it wasn't just one country; it was several countries working together. But as is typical of regions, often they can find some similarities, and it was always fascinating to see. It was a real sharing time around the collective countries running the call, and a lot of sort of competition between the different regions each time to have some fun with it and share some fun facts about their culture. So that's something I will definitely continue to do.
Thank you. Sophie.
Yeah, I find it's always important to build some fun into those elements. And one thing I try is, you know, with team members kind of sitting in different parts of the world, and people usually love to like travel and explore. So we'll take turns talking about, hey, if you come to my country or if you come to my city, right, what I recommend, right, as itinerary, how you go about exploring, say, you know, India, or say, hey, Netherlands, you know, for like a week. And these are the places you go, these are the places you eat at, and what is your most fun memories about, you know, these places. And that can get into, you know, a little bit kind of personal stories, and people always love that. And, you know, later on, funny enough, right, when team finally got together, we happened to be in one of those cities, and that became really helpful information for people to be able to tap into.
Thank you, Sophie. Dr. Susan.
Yeah, I support all the technical things that we can do, but one of the things that I've done working in a particular location where there were a mixed culture was the dress style. And I thought I brought that up. You know, I wanted to feel that I was part of their culture also. And so I would dress with the clothing that they wear. I made so many pieces and I would wear them. If I have to be engaging with like the community in some form, I would wear those clothing so they know that I'm part of them also. And for me, advising anyone about trying to be a cultural fit is just to embrace that culture in all its aspects, whether it's the food, the work, the dress, whatever, you know. And so you don't feel as if you're different, but we're all in this thing together. Yes.
Wonderful practices, and thank you so very much for being so generous with sharing your insights and your expertise and even your passion for this topic during our hour together. One thing that I recently did with a team, as we were doing a bit of team cohesion and team development, I asked them to share their favorite childhood fairy tale story, and how that influenced their view on the world. And I was so blessed. It was a intensely culturally diverse team, and just the richness of those stories coming together, and quite quite a selection of takes on resilience also, because fairy tales at the end of the day are stories of overcoming most of the time. So thank you very much, Alisa, Peter, Sophie, and Dr. Susan. It was a joy. It was a privilege being part of this conversation space with you. Thank you so very much, everybody in the audience. Please do keep this conversation alive. I can think with a lot of difficulty of a few other topics just as important as this one, and just enjoy the sheer diversity of our workplaces. Thank you, Jessa. Thank you, Enrique. And I hope I will get to welcome as many of you as possible in many future conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.